how has President Trump changed social media forever?
Man, there are a lot of ways, and I think there are short-term and long-term impacts. The short-term are somewhat easier to understand, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of division. We've seen, to your point, kind of the rise of these alternate social networks, the Gabs and Parlors of the world, right? These are basically coming about because the president and some of his followers don't feel that they can speak in the way that they want to on Facebook and Twitter. And so there is a fracturing of sorts of kind of online discourse that we're seeing happening in real time. And I think that's a direct link to how the president used social media. Now, the longer term, I think, could be regulation, right? I mean, this is an industry that up until now has really policed itself. And I think what we've seen from the president and from these tech companies' actions against the president has raised a lot of questions about who should be making these decisions. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that this could lead to a lot more laws and rules for these companies.
Yeah, I think that makes absolute sense. And it's certainly, I think, opened a can of worms when it comes to who can and cannot have access to these platforms. Kurt, I'm curious about these alternative platforms that you write about. You mentioned Gab, you mentioned Parler. Parler could be gone because of AWS, Amazon Web Services, has said it will not host it anymore. But do these alternatives to Twitter and Facebook and Snap and YouTube, do they stand any chance of succeeding when they need infrastructure of bigger tech companies to make them successful?
Well, I think there's a technical element, which you point out, right, which is that they were reliant on Amazon. And when Amazon pulled the plug, at least on Parler, that makes things very complicated and challenging. But I think there's other issues at play here. And I've been covering social media for about 7 or 8 years, and there's always kind of up-and-coming platforms that fail to catch on. And the biggest reason is that the benefit of Facebook, the benefit of Twitter, is that everyone is already there, right? The whole reason that people want to go to these social media sites is they want to interact with people. And it's really hard to get that scale when you're starting from scratch. And I think the challenges of Gab and Parler are such that not only is it hard to get scale, but they've been kind of pigeonholed as, far right or very conservative networks, which immediately alienates a big portion of the online audience. So I just think getting a scale of users is going to be incredibly hard.
That is such a good point, Kurt, because over the last few weeks, as Parler has grown over the last few months, what I kept seeing on Twitter from people who were joining Parler was they continued to tweet. They would also try to advertise to their Twitter followers, say, hey, come over to Parler where I am.
Yeah, exactly. And, I wrote over the summer, this was long before I even thought that it was possible that the president could be permanently banned from Twitter. But I wrote over summer, he's never going to go to Parler. And the reason is because it just doesn't have the audience, right? I mean, when you look at someone like President Trump, what is he like? He likes big crowds. He likes being able to talk about how large his ratings are. And he had 88 million followers on Twitter, right? He's just not going to be able to replicate that on any other platform. And so I think that might be the downfall as much as anything of why these services might not take off. Of course, I could be wrong, but I just feel like getting to that scale is going to be incredibly hard. And that's what really makes a lot of these platforms valuable to someone like President Trump.
Well, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, because as you mentioned, this has far and widespread implications for the way that tech companies think about who and who not to allow to have a platform. You wrote about last night, Jack Dorsey finally weighing in, the CEO of Twitter, finally weighing in on the decision to ban President Trump. He explained it, but said that he does have concerns about it. What did he say?
Yeah, he was shared a pretty long and thoughtful post. It was the first time that he'd commented since the ban last Friday. And I think there were two themes from his chat. One was that, this is not an easy decision. It was the right decision, he felt, but it has its impacts and it's going to have effects, right, on the idea of free speech online. And I don't think he's taking that lightly. I think the second is really questioning who has control here and who has the power. He kind of voiced concern over the fact that Twitter and other tech companies could kind of rally together in a sense to, take Trump offline, to take the Parlers of the world offline. And he wondered, is it the right idea that these tech companies have that kind of control and power? So I think those are the right questions to be asking, right? It's somewhat tough for him because obviously Twitter is making those decisions, and his post in some ways kind of questioned whether they did the right thing. But, I think that's what thoughtful people do at the same time, right? They made a tough call, and he's now kind of using that to think, well, what happens next?